Hello, ladies and gentlemen of the line. This week, we are doing a post-election wrap-up. What happened? What went right? What went wrong? And the king is coming to Canada. Then we're going to swing by Alberta. Alberta separatism, national unity crisis. Is this real? Is this not real? We're going to get into it. And lastly, we're going to talk about Ontario and the future of Pierre Poilievre. Can he stick around as Ontario and the Conservatives' erstwhile and beleaguered leader? We will soon find out. We are recording this today, May 2nd, 2025, just after the Canadian election has come to a close. I'm Jen Gerson, and I'm here with your fellow co-host, Matt Gurney. That's today at The Line Podcast.
This episode of The Line Podcast has been brought to you by Unsmoke Canada, which is dedicated to helping Canadians who are looking to quit smoking understand the full range of options available. Despite decades of government programs and increasing regulations, today, nearly 4 million Canadians still smoke cigarettes. Adult smokers who choose to continue to smoke should be aware that other options exist. While not risk-free, alternatives such as heated tobacco, vaping products, and oral smokeless products provide a potentially less harmful choice. Smoke-free alternatives do not involve combustion or burning, like smoking a cigarette does. Instead of heavily restricting access and information about these options, Canada's government should be adopting common-sense legislation that will help further bring down Canada's smoking rates and put information in the hands of Canadians. Information such as the relative risks compared to cigarettes. Because the products are not the same, and they shouldn't be treated the same. It's just common sense. Learn more about how a smoke-free future can be achieved at Unsmoke.ca. Okay, here we are.
So here we are. We're a couple days out from the election. We've had an opportunity to do all of our immediate post-election response podcasts, chats. We've had some sleep. Yesterday, I stared at a wall for several hours. It was beautiful. And now we're back at it. So, Matt, first thing, I would like to say that something that I had long predicted was going to happen is now happening, but it's not happening the way that I predicted it was going to happen. We appear to be going into a two-party system. Or pretty close to a two-party system, bloc accepted. But I didn't expect that it was going to be the Liberals and the Conservatives. I wrongly predicted that it was going to be the Conservatives and the NDP.
Well, okay, maybe, but here is something that I honestly don't know.
Okay.
And this is something, we put this in our bullshit bulletin, which we published earlier today. There is an unknown known. Right hand. No, it's a known unknown. I'm trying to get Rumsfeld in here. This is a known unknown. We know there is a question. We do not know what the answer is. Is what just happened to the NDP a blip? Or is it a bigger structural thing? Now, we put this in the bulletin already, so I'm repeating myself. The NDP has had structural problems for a long time. It was always going to get into a place eventually where it was going to be hard for it to be both like a rural, blue-collar, working-class representative party and the favorite party of downtown urban progressives. And I think the party, for its own reasons, was more comfortable with being the downtown urban progressive party, probably because most of the leaders were themselves of that ilk. The question that I would then have, do they come back from that? Is this a fundamental rupture in the NDP's vote structure, or is what just happened a fluke? I honestly don't know. And this is an important question because, first of all, it speaks to your point about whether or not we're going to a two-party system. It also speaks to the immediate electoral calculus of the NDP. If they're convinced that just what happened to them is like lightning in a bottle, they might be in a rush to get to the next election because they think they will automatically rebound. I don't know if that's true or not. We're going to have to go talk to some people about this. But yeah, you're right. I've caught up on my sleep this week, but I haven't figured that one out yet.
All right, well, so that's probably not knowable, and we're not going to be able to know that until we know one of two things. One, who the NDP selects as their leader. Are they going to select a kind of highly symbolic, almost Elizabeth May style fringy kind of character? Or are they going to elect someone who's got like a proven track record of governance, leadership, someone who can actually steer the ship in tumultuous time kind of leader? Unknowable. We don't know which way the party is going to go. I'm going to repeat something that I've often said about the NDP, so I'm sorry if I'm boring people here, but my underlying assumption about the psychology of that party is that these are people who are truly committed partisans or truly committed ideologically, and as a result, they don't actually want to win. And they constantly seem to self-destruct because they want to be on the periphery of power. They want to have an influence on where things go, but they don't actually want the responsibility and compromises of power. And so they always kind of seem to get to the edge, and then they go, if we're actually in charge of things, we have to make decisions, and all of our ideologies actually have to be tested in the laboratory of reality, and I don't know if I actually really want that. It's much better for us to be a third party, complaining from the outside, making sure our left is represented or at the table, but without actually taking the responsibility and ownership that comes with real power. And so that has always been my theory of the NDP, and I think it's played out here. I think the structural demands of a two-party system and a first past the post system remain constant, although they remain constant over time. You can't predict it, that we're going to move to a two-party system in any given 5-year period or 10-year period. I just think that the logic of the systems tend to favor two-party systems over long stretches of time. The other thing that I think we can't predict is whether or not Mark Carney is going to blow it. Like, if Mark Carney continues to show up as the adult in the room, manages the federal files appropriately, doesn't exacerbate the multiple front unity issues we're running into, and handles Trump well, then what reason do the urban progressives have to go back? Reasonably speaking. As long as he's throwing them a sop every once in a while, everyone's happy, right? Everybody's happy. And then the liberals cement themselves as the official sort of center left governing coalition from that perspective. The conservatives present themselves as that. The bloc holds the balance of power when things get wonky. And essentially we're in a 2.5 party system in short order. So that's not knowable. What I thought was fascinating about this particular election is not even just that the voters left the NDP to go Liberal, but they appear to have left the NDP and they seem to have splintered between the Conservatives and the Liberals. So, yeah. I mean, I've even heard that some numbers, now we're still splicing some numbers here, but the NDP voters defected from the NDP and went Conservative over Liberal at 2-1 margins.
I think seats did. I don't know if the voters did, because that might be different math. But
we have to figure out what the math on that is. But that goes to what you were talking about in the bullshit bulletin about the divide between the cultural side of the NDP, between sort of the old school cultural union, blue collar worker, and the urban progressive, and just how shaky and fragile that alliance always was, and how shaky and fragile both of those groups' conceptions of the left always was. So that's been fascinating to watch. But my takeaway from all of that is that one of the problems that the Conservatives have always had is they've always assumed that they could only win in a scenario where the vote on the left was split. Mm-hmm. What this election should tell them is that's not true. They are competitive in a two-party system. The voters just align their priorities differently than how they did previously, and the conceptions of left versus right become more malleable. So the Conservatives could have won this election, even with a collapsed NDP. They just didn't get over the edge.
There was something I remember for a great many years ago that I thought was bullshit then, and I still think it's bullshit. It was around the time of the 2008 prorogation crisis, that old chestnut. Yeah. There were these really obnoxious signs, and I think there were even some buttons people were wearing, and it was like, I'm part of the 62% majority. And what that meant was, like, the Conservatives in it was 08? Yeah, it was 08 election. They had won, a strong minority government with 38% of the vote, and people were going, well, hang on, I'm not conservative. I'm part of the 62% majority. That's bullshit. And I have tried so many times to make this point to people to get them to understand. The most bitter partisan divide in this country is not liberal conservative, it's liberal NDP. Like, that's where the real animosity has often been. And the idea that if, for instance, I know one of the arguments, particularly among progressives, that gets used is, if we had proportional representation, we would win all the elections. No, you wouldn't. You would fundamentally change the voting calculations of millions of people.
Yes.
And the idea that the way people vote under first past the post would just immediately migrate down to the last decimal point to a pop rep
Yeah,
system
nonsense.
prop rep system does not make sense to me.
Yeah.
Now, I still tend to think Canada probably is on balance like a center left population. So I do think in a rep by pop system there would be, or sorry, a proportional representation system. I think there would be an advantage for Liberals and NDPers.
Well,
But I
yes.
don't think it would be. I don't think it would be. First of all, I don't think it'd be as big as they thought it would be. I also think it would manifest in weird ways. How many people in this country would vote conservative if they weren't worried about blocking the Liberal or the NDP in their area? There would be
Well,
more than zero.
the other thing I would say is also it depends on what you mean by left and right. Left and right are not static conceptions, right? Like 5 years ago, you and I were considered far right. Now we're considered, well, maybe squishy centrist. And in 2 years, we're going to be considered raging lefties. These sorts of terms and terminologies really are very rarely rooted in static concepts of ideological formation, and they're often much more rooted in cultural identity and geography and all kinds of other types of weird emotional connections that don't track to, Burkean conservatism or MAGA conservatism or populism or, all of these other types of labels. So, yeah, I think that this election probably isn't a blip. I think that this election probably, as I said, my surprise is that the liberals are going to come out of this the last 10 years as being probably the second of a two-party system. I thought that there was an opportunity there for the NDP to just take that, and they chose not to. So be it. Moving on, I think that this one does fundamentally change the math on things. The other thing that I think that is not knowable right now is, are the NDP actually going to elect a leader, or are 3 or 4 of their members just going to defect to the Liberals in exchange for some cabinet posts? In which case, the NDP basically becomes the Greens.
I hope there are no defections. I understand defections are legal, but I think I've always been uncomfortable with people bolting parties in the immediate aftermath of an election. When you're into a term, if you find that it's not working, if you can't work with your caucus, if your leader's pissing you off, you cross the floor. I don't love it, but I get it. But just immediately, like spending a long time making a pitch to local voters in a specific riding to represent one party and set of values, looking at the results the morning after and changing your flag, I don't like it. I understand why the Liberals might want to do it. My advice to them, to the extent they're listening, is don't. They don't need to. Like, the Bloc is already offering concessions for reasons we get into in the bulletin. I think they've realized that separatism is dead right now. The NDP, they're probably going to have to play ball. I'm not even convinced the Conservatives can offer much resistance right now. They got to figure out what they're doing with their leader. And we're going to talk about that in a different segment, right? But, like, let's just put this mildly. I don't know what the Conservatives do today. Like, the King's coming. He's going to deliver the throne speech, which, by the way, is kind of cool. Thumbs up for that. I got to see if I can figure out a way to get accredited to go see that. That would be fun.
I actually think that this is brilliant, by the way. I
Having
want
the
to get
King
into
come?
the King coming to Charleston and the deep politics of that, because I think this is really smart.
Oh, the King, though, is playing a smart hand, too, right? Because
Yes.
he hasn't said anything in public. And people were mad at him a few months ago for that. But then he showed up at an event in Canadian military uniform. Like, the monarchy works in different ways. The monarchy is not going to put out a TikTok saying, hey, Canada, we love you. But the King of Canada will fly to Ottawa to deliver the speech from the throne. That is a message that will be understood in the necessary places.
Yep. Well, and I think it should be necessary. Do you want to get into the King coming to Canada? So, I mean, firstly, this affirms.
I think it's fun.
Well, no, but this sort of symbolically affirms Canada's historical connection to Europe. It also symbolically demonstrates that Canada is a different country with a different political system, and we're embracing that in order to create and highlight a contrast between the American political system. It's actually a slow motion show of diplomatic force against the Americans without antagonizing the Americans. And also, on a deep psychological level, we know that Trump really likes Charles, because Charles is a king. So it's almost like bringing in a higher level from a Donald Trump perspective. It's almost like bringing in like a higher level mafia don in order to like do a tour. It's like, no,
Yeah.
this is my vassal state,
This is my
Don.
territory.
This is
Yeah.
my territory, right? Now, I don't think that most Democratic Canadians will see it that way, and correctly, they shouldn't see it that way. But someone like Donald probably will. So I don't know. I think it's a show of it's a really effective show of soft power. I think it's once again a real demonstration of how monarchy can be a really fascinating force in terms of diplomacy and soft power actually works in the world. And good, because you know what? If we want to continue to be, he's the king of Canada, so it is appropriate for him to be engaging in soft force or soft power shows of force in this way. This is the appropriate use for monarchy at the appropriate moment. It's also a great coup for Carney, because it shows that Carney made the request and enough people are taking him seriously in the UK in particular, and in the royal household in particular, to listen to that, to adhere to that request. I mean, I think this is the first time that a monarch will be giving the throne speech in Canada since like 1977. That's
Yeah.
a big deal. It's a really interesting and big deal. So, like, look, I think this is just incredibly smart. I think it's brilliant. I think that you have to, even if you're a staunch Republican Canadian, you'd have to acknowledge the intelligence of what's happening here symbolically and narratively. And I don't want to necessarily get into my pro-monarchy rants, but this is why, man. This is
I,
why.
I do.
Oh, okay.
I want to, look, I wrote this when, for the line, I traveled to London and covered the King's coronation, had a blast, and found the entire experience incredibly fascinating. I wrote this at the time. I'm not an enthusiastic monarchist. Like, I'm not someone who is fascinated by the gossip or has a portrait of the king in my house like my great grandmother did. Like, there are people who are really into the monarchy. I'm not. I actually think I tend to think my views on the monarchy as an institution sort of align with the views of Canadian Republicans, that it's weird and a little bit silly. But where my views diverge from the Canadian monarchists is that it is weird and a little bit silly, but it works. And I think it's fantastic. And it doesn't have to make sense to me to function. I love it for this. And I'm never going to read the tabloids. I don't care about what, apparently I saw like a bunch of headlines today about Prince Harry, or I don't think we're supposed to call him that anymore, whatever we're supposed to call him now. And I
He's
didn't
still
read
Prince
any of
Harry.
them.
He's still
I
a
didn't
prince of the
care.
realm.
I was just, oh, Harry's in the news again. Click, like, just, they don't care. But I get the power of the monarchy, and something that Canadian Republicans have never grappled with is that you'll do an opinion poll and it shows more than half of Canadians want Canada to cut its ties with the monarchy. When the king shows up here, Canadians are going to line up to wave little flags.
Mm-hmm.
And this is something that I wrote about this in the context of the coronation. The monarchy gets, in a way that I would say on other topical stories these days, the Catholic Church gets it really well. Pageantry. And whether it is the king showing up to sit on the special chair while school children, wave flags, or it's like some of the most savvy, smart journalists in the world are going to be standing around in Rome staring at a chimney. These institutions are good at this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And if I was being cynical about the monarchy, I would say they're good at this stuff to our disadvantage. They keep us in thrall. But now I'm leaning into that, because exactly as Jen has said, there is a man about 500 miles to the south of Ottawa who will be enthralled by this. And it will send a message to him. And I think at a time when maybe we need some unity in this country, as much as the Republicans find this annoying, the king showing up in Ottawa, it's going to work.
So, okay, so this is a very specific feature of constitutional monarchy, not absolute monarchy. I'm not pro absolute monarchy. I'm pro constitutional monarchy.
I mean,
And
let's see how
anybody who
things
wants
go.
to, well,
Not
look,
ruling anything out.
well, it's true. But look, if you want to go read some of the best defenses for constitutional monarchy, one of the most beautiful writers in the English language, oh God, I'm having a total brain fart. Orwell, thank you. Duh, I'm an idiot. Orwell actually talked about about constitutional monarchy and why it was effective and why it works, and that's because humans need to anthropomorphize the state, right? And when you allow them to create that pageantry and to create that anthropomorphization of the state, hey, I even said the word right this week. There we go. And you will put this into an office or a man who has no real actual power over the state, you create this really interesting distinction that allows people to create a close emotional connection with a governing body while separating that emotional connection from the partisan aspects of grubby, rub-a-day, conservative versus liberal apartheid. So you take the passion of the partisanship and you put it into something kind of harmless and spectacular. And then that allows you to get on the grubby sort of adversarial nature of politics in a separate sphere, so to speak. So yeah, the country of Canada can be totally divided between conservative and liberal, but King Charles comes to a visit, we can all get behind that, right? And
especially conservatives. Conservatives aren't going to be able to resist the liberals having the king come.
Absolutely.
The bloc will be truculent, but fuck them.
Is it irrational? Yes.
Yeah.
But that's the beauty of it. It's emotional. It's purely irrational, right? Like it's intelligently irrational. And that's what's great about it. And that's why constitutional monarchy is so effective. And if you want to see, personally, I don't think republicanism as demonstrated down in the States is doing itself any favors as a model of government, because what's happening right now, you see people anthropomorphizing the state in the vision of Donald Trump, and you're getting all of these cross lines between the anthropomorphized emotional state and the actual grubby act of partisan politics, and that's where you get this convergence that can sometimes converge into autocracy or authoritarianism, right? By separating these two, the rational and the irrational, the dignified and the undignified aspects of government, you can enjoy anthropomorphizing the state and treat it as a show, and then get back to business as a separate sphere of influence. That's how it works, and it works really, really well. There's a reason why we've created these silly little irrational systems, and it's because humans aren't rational. We're irrational monkeys, and we need irrational monkey things like pageantry and personified states in order to function appropriately. So whatever. It's a terrible job for the king himself, but, show up with the ermine coat, put on the hat, and read the speech.
And we will wave little flags at you.
And we'll wave little flags. It's great.
I am absolutely going to email my friends in Ottawa and figure out if I can get a press pass or something, because that would just be a cool thing to see.
That would be so cool.
Security will be high, and I haven't done the necessary. I'm not a member of the press gallery, so it's probably too late. But I have a few strings to pull. Maybe I'll give them a gentle tug.
Even if you just want to show up and be a part of the crowd, that would be
wave flags.
To go. Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally.
Fun. It's funny.
And
we'll
it's going to be a total show of support for Canadian unity writ large, right? Mm-hmm. Because it's going to be an excuse for us, and people aren't going to be cheering on the liberals. But you put the king on, now we can cheer the country.
It's funny, you said a few minutes ago, we'll actually talk about the election again in a moment. I have a question I want to ask you about the election, but you said a minute ago that if you want to read something that's like a great defense of constitutional monarchy, you went down the direction of Orwell. I would have just said an American history textbook.
Yeah.
Under nominal circumstances, I am a fan of the United States, their system of government, the people, and the history. But right now, we've been hearing about the imperial presidency for years, right? The growing power of the Oval Office is a center not of just administrative power, but actual sort of commanding national power. Okay, I'll go wave a little flag at the king, and then the best part is, at the end of the trip, he gets on his plane and he goes home to his island.
Yes, that's the great feature about the king. It's like having grandchildren. You get to play with them, and then they go home.
Canada has optimized constitutional monarchy. When we need it, it's there, and when we don't, it's in a castle on an island across the sea.
Perfect.
It's amazing.
Everyone wins.
So anyway, I am glad the nice old man will come across the ocean from his castle across the sea, and then we will wave flags at him. I want to ask you a question about the election.
All right, go.
What surprised you? Because I woke up on Tuesday with a mild hangover. Thank you for joining us on our live stream. And I began actually looking at results. And I talked to some liberal and conservative friends. And one of the things, and I was glad they agreed with me, because I wanted a sanity, kind of a gut check here, which was, this is a weird map. And even though the seat totals are kind of roughly where you might have guessed, going into the election, and this is just interesting, one of the things both my conservative and liberal sources told me was that the liberals were tracking towards 170. And there was obviously a margin of error there. It could have been plus or minus 5 or 10 seats. If it was plus, it's a liberal majority. If it was minus, it's a liberal minority. And they got 168. So both my liberal and conservative friends both gave me the same version of it. They were expecting the liberals to get around 170, and they got 168. That ain't bad. What I now wonder about, though, because I've heard this from both parties, is both parties lost seats they thought they'd won.
Mm-hmm.
Both parties ended up winning seats they didn't expect to win. Obviously, for the Conservatives, and we'll talk about this later when we talk about Pierre Poilievre specifically, the Conservatives did not expect to lose Carleton. And I know, there was that report about a week ago about the Conservatives were deploying assets there, and the Conservatives were like, no, we're not, this is fake news. Very trustworthy Conservatives that I know will not try to spin me were telling me, we're not going to lose Carleton. Like, this is dirty tricks, this is fake news. And then they lost it, and it wasn't close. Fanjoy won with more than 50% of the vote.
Although it's possible that it was dirty tricks that worked.
I don't think so. I don't see any evidence. The guy just worked his ass off for a year.
Yeah.
He started door knocking over a year ago.
No. I mean, like the people spinning that Pierre's going to lose.
Oh, maybe.
That might have been a spin in an attempt to build momentum for Fanjoy.
Yeah, maybe. You can never rule that out. But
Sure.
in general, this is an election where the outcome is not wildly off what I expected. Like, my own personal sense was that it was either going to be a very strong Liberal majority or maybe they would eke over a majority. But I look at parts of the map and I'm like, that's weird. What did you wake up feeling on Tuesday other than tired and hungover?
Yeah. So I guess two things kind of surprised me. One is the loss in Carleton. That did surprise me. I thought that was bullshit. And then the other one that kind of surprised me is that both the Liberals and the Conservatives got over 40%. That was interesting to me. So like I said, I sort of tend to think the collapse of the NDP is not a blip at this point. I can't rule it out that it was a blip. But I think that they have purity tested themselves into oblivion. And that's that. And I think we now have a different electoral, not system, but we have a different electoral reality than we had previously. And future strategy, future tactics are going to have to go into a Canadian election saying, all right, how do we get 45% in a two-party system as opposed to how do we get 41% in a three-party system? If you're a conservative or a liberal, respectively. Different math, different maps, different paths to victory under those assumptions. And other complicating all of this is that I don't think the pollsters have a lot of history about how to poll numbers in a two-party system, on a first-past-the-post system in Canada. So that's new. Add to this, there are just more voters. I mean, if you actually look at raw vote count, Pierre got, I think, almost 8 million votes, and Aaron O'Toole in the last election got something like 5.5 million votes.
Give me a minute. I'll just pull that up right now.
Yeah, like the actual numbers and where the votes came from, and just, firstly, there were more voters. And the voter turnout wasn't necessarily much higher. It was only like 67%, I believe.
Thereabouts.
So, but it was only a statistically small increase in voter turnout overall, but there are more voters. The collapse of the PPC absolutely helped the CPC, no question. But they managed to pull in the new voters, or the increased overall total voters, by a significant margin, by about even margins with the Liberals. And as we mentioned previously, they pulled in previous NDP voters at a really high, they must have, at a really reasonably high margin. That's a really interesting set of gains for the CPC. And it creates really interesting future conditions for them. I think we're going to get into that in our third segment.
Yeah.
But those are sort of my two, interesting.
So, to your point a minute ago about turnout, it's an interesting election because, look, I'm not going to round this off to the nearest thousands. This is just big numbers. But this election, the one we just had last week, 8.5 million Liberals, almost 8.1 million Conservatives. So those were the actual votes cast. Last time, Liberals and Conservatives were both close to 5.5.
Yeah.
So between the two of them here, they've each gone up by 3 million voters.
Yeah.
Now, a lot of that, like, so that's 6 million voters
Yeah.
total. You can explain some of that by looking at the NDP that from 2021 to now lost 1.8 million voters. For the NDP, that's a catastrophe. They lost 60% of their vote share since last time.
The bloc, and you can't
But the
account for that by the bloc. The bloc's been stable. The bloc has
stable,
neither
more
gained
or
nor
less.
lost.
Well, I got the numbers right here. I've pulled up the chart. In
However,
2000,
in a place where the population's
1.3.
increasing, that's a loss, effectively. They've
Yeah.
failed to gain ground.
The bloc is down about 100,000 votes in the last 4 years, but that doesn't account. So even if we, on hand, God, I hate doing this, but let's look at the grains.
And do you want to know how they lost those 100,000 votes? Those 100,000 votes died.
Yeah, probably. Okay,
If you
green
just do
vote.
a quick math in the top of your head and you're assuming a 1% overall death rate on the population over 4 years, that means probably they didn't lose votes or those votes didn't change allegiance. Probably those votes died and they were unable to bring in new votes with younger
Greens
people.
down about 100,000. People's Party essentially got wiped out too, but they were, putting all of this together, we can come up with about 3 million votes that are on the move in this election away from the smaller parties combined, which accounts for not quite half of these 6 million votes the Liberals and the Conservatives split when they went up. Right. Another interesting thing about this election that it hasn't really been noted much. This is the first time the Liberals have won the popular vote in a while. Because in 19 and in 21, the Conservatives came up short on seats, but they won the popular vote. I was wondering if we were going to have that happen again, like if the vaunted Liberal vote efficiency was going to save their bacon again. No, the Liberals won the popular vote. It was pretty close, but they won it decisively. Yep. It was close, but it wasn't like margin of error stuff. It was like a modest but real win. So it's a weird election, I think, in a lot of ways. And I think your point about no one knowing how to model the collapse of the NDP is right. I think that is correct.
They'll figure it out. They're math nerds. They'll do some formula that I don't understand.
What? I haven't this week had the heart to talk to my NDP friends.
Yeah.
I feel bad for them. I remember I have a friend who had a career in professional athletics. And whenever they got eliminated from the playoffs, you didn't call the next day. You waited for them to call you. You let them feel it. And then eventually you talk to them. And I'm kind of treating my NDP friends the same way. They just got eliminated in 4 games straight from the playoffs. And I don't know if they're going to make the playoffs next year. They might in fact be relegated to a different league. And the other weird thing is just purely in terms of analyzing the data. I need to talk to my polling nerds, but they're all sleeping.
Yeah, no, let's give it a time. I mean, the other thing I would say is don't feel too bad about the NDP because the NDP are still very much a going concern in provincial politics, right? BC, Alberta, Manitoba, even Saskatchewan. I think they're still a going concern. They're still an active party. There's an active NDP party, particularly in the West. I just am not sure that it's going to be a federal party.
Can I tell you one interesting thing I've heard in the wind? And
sure.
I have to be very vague about this.
Okay.
Surprising people are impressed by Carney.
Oh, I'm not surprised by that.
I'm not impressed by Carney so far. And I'm not saying I'm disappointed in him. I'm parsing my words carefully here. Carney has thus far been kind of what I would have expected a technocrat banker to be. I think he has performed, I think I described this in my column recently as, or maybe one of our dispatches, I kind of described him as an unusually bright rookie doing a reasonably good job learning the ropes. And he has yet to have a moment of me being like, oh, wow, he really nailed that. That was great. Maybe actually getting the king to come might be my first, ooh, good one moment. But I'm just hearing from interesting places, people who would have sworn up and down they were done with the Liberals, they're looking at Carney. And if Carney can consolidate that and actually make some progress, I think he's going to buy some actual support from Canadians. But the flip side, of course, if he doesn't.
Well,
If
then this whole thing collapses and the NDP potentially comes back from the dead. It's happened before.
Carney can't afford to fail the deliverology the same way Justin Trudeau did.
No, no. The other thing I would say is, like, I think I'm probably more inclined to like Carney than you for some reason, which is interesting. And I think I can speak for myself here. One thing that I do like about Carney is that that's a guy who's actually speaking to me like I'm a grown-up.
You're not the first person I've heard who has raised that issue. And it's an interesting issue because it's a contrast with Justin Trudeau.
Oh, and
Trudeau
Freeland.
lectured us.
Yep. And also, bluntly, I also think that to some extent it's a contrast for Pierre. Pierre has a tendency to pander.
Or patronize.
Right? Or patronize. And I don't think he's doing it consciously or purposely or in a malicious way, but he's a tendency to pander. Like, every time I hear Pierre talk about the WEF or the globalists or any of that crap, I'm just like, oh, fuck off with this. Like, I'm just like, stop. You're literally pandering. You're pandering to people in your base who have gone all in on conspiratorial garbage. And we saw him do that during the election campaign, and it's off-putting to me because I know it's conspiratorial. Either someone like me doesn't know what the hell you're talking about, and you're using language that's jargon that's completely obscure unless you've already gone down that particular rabbit hole, or you do know what he's talking about, and you're rolling your eyes.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like, the people who buy into that stuff, I mean, I have a lot of I'm trying to finish a book on conspiracy theories, and I have a lot of empathy for individuals who get locked into conspiratorial thinking. Usually I think it's a cause of how should I say this? A lack of social support is usually the cause of it, or a lack of meaning and purpose in their lives. Like, I understand why people get there, and even really intelligent people can get there. Some of the most intelligent people you ever meet are the ones who are most vulnerable to conspiracism, right? So I have a lot of empathy for people like this. But I don't want to be governed by people like this. Like, you know what I mean? Like, this is like, I have a lot of empathy for people who
even by proxy. I don't want to be governed by people and enthralled to those people.
Exactly. It's like guys, I understand there are legitimate, sane critiques of the WEF, and then there's whatever this is. This is the assumption that the WF is a secret, shadowy cabal that's trying to that rigged the election for Mark Carney's. Like there's that level, and all of the sane critiques of the WEF you can also level against every other collection of people who network for the purpose of power. It's the same critiques you could level against the IDU. It's the same critiques you could level against the Manning Foundation. Like, you can level those critiques and still stay in the realm of sanity. But we all know that some of the people who are off in the weeds talking about the WEF are not in the realm of sanity. They're assuming that this is a shadow cabal government that's trying to make you all eat bugs. And I'm like, I can empathize with how you got there. I can empathize with what must have been going on in your life that got you to think that. I can empathize with the need to believe that there's somebody in control or in charge of the world. I can empathize with that, but I can't be ruled by that because those are people who don't actually understand how the systems around them are working, and they have a very fantastic idea of how the world is working, and they can't govern. And I'm sorry. I'm not trying to be a dick to these people. I'm really not, because they're my fellow humans, right? And they're my fellow citizens.
I'm not going to let you do another shared humanity rant. We've had one of those.
We're not going to have another shared humanity rant. But when Pierre panders to this, and it is pandering, by the way, because Pierre knows that's what I'm saying is true. Like, Pierre knows this. Like, conservatives have gone to the WEF. Like, they know that this is bullshit. But when they pander to it, they're actually insulting the electorate. And the people who have bought into these conspiracies don't know it. And I find that gross. And one thing I appreciated about Carney, and again, we'll see how he rules, we'll see how he governs, we'll see what kinds of policies he comes to the table with. I don't rule out the possibility that I'm going to totally turn I'm going to wind up disliking this guy as much as I sort of viscerally disliked Trudeau at the end. That could happen. But Carney, even though he's unpolished and sort of not as snappy and not as good as a politician, there's an adult there, and he's trying to speak to other adults. And I respect that. Well, RIP our comment section.
Now, here I'm going to try and redeem ourselves with the commenters. Here is
Okay.
why I'm going to explain to you why I'm not impressed with Carney.
Okay.
But I'm going to leave open the possibility of being impressed by Carney. I want to stress again, and this is a semantics thing, I'm not unimpressed by Carney. Carney has not disappointed or alienated me. I'm just really skeptical. And I have spent my entire life being told that this guy is different. I just don't believe it anymore. Some of what I've seen from Carney is that he seems to get it, that he says the right things, that I think his analysis, his diagnosis is correct. But I said the same thing about Chrystia Freeland. And the party never changed. And like I said on one or two podcasts ago, and I wrote it in my final column before the election, I don't buy the theory that the Liberals are offering us, which is that the party is great, but something went wrong with Justin Trudeau. That Justin Trudeau, either through like malfeasance or incompetence, prevented the party from doing the things that Carney now will do. And the idea that Carney is going to just bring his, what did you call it, technocratic daddy or technocratic
daddy? Yeah, I think it sticks.
The fact that he's going to technocrat daddy us so hard that he's going to take the Liberal Party that was okay with Justin Trudeau and turn it into a nimble, responsive deliverology machine. It's a big ask to get me to believe that.
I mean, look, you're probably right. And my hopes will probably be dashed. I think that's probably correct. I would just say, look, there's no way for either of us to know how Carney's going to go until he actually starts governing. And, we're going to offer weekly play-by-plays in terms of what we think he's doing right or what we think he's doing wrong, as is our duty. I think you're open potentially to being impressed by Carney. I'm open to being disappointed by him. We'll see where it goes. But until we actually start to see him actually do stuff, it's hard to judge any further, really. Either way, I would remind readers and listeners, liberal, conservative, everyone else, that the success of Canada, one way or the other, now lies with him. So I wish him success, because his success is now all of our success, at least until the next election.
In a moment, which is almost a word, in a moment, I'm going to ask Jen her thoughts on some of the interesting stories coming out of Alberta, or interesting story, I think would be the best way of putting it. Something has happened in Alberta that was immediately noticed in other provinces. And we're going to talk about that. We're going to do that in a moment. Stick around. As always, go to our main page, readtheline.ca. Follow us there. You can get a free account. You'll get access to almost everything you do. You can get a paid account, which will get you access to everything we do and my personal goodwill. So check us out at readtheline.ca. Here, if you're watching on YouTube, click the bell, click subscribe, all that stuff. If you're watching us on Twitter, be sure to follow our accounts. And if you're listening to us on one of the podcast streaming apps, leave us a glowing review. We are excited to be following the aftermath of this election. We're going to keep On the Line going. The Line podcast is going to keep going. We got lots we're going to be talking with you guys about over the next couple of months. And in moments, it's going to be why Jen is annoyed with the government in her own province. This episode of the Line podcast is also brought to you by Innovative Medicines Canada. With a new government in place, one thing remains clear. Canada must continue to prioritize patients and healthcare innovation. Innovative Medicines Canada is focused on collaborating with all levels of government to improve access to life-saving medicines and develop a healthcare system that prioritizes patients, ignites innovation, and drives economic growth. Canada's innovative medicine sector plays a critical role, not just in health outcomes, but in keeping us competitive on the global stage. That's why, even during a moment of political change, Innovative Medicines Canada is staying focused on the issues that matter most to Canadians. And as Canada moves forward with national pharmacare, Innovative Medicines Canada believes it's possible to expand access without limiting choice by strengthening what works and fixing what doesn't. Visit innovativemedicines.ca to learn more. I'm going to regret asking you this. And the funny thing is, too, I actually just made a really politically incorrect statement before we started recording that
I mean,
we're
you
going to.
did, but I laughed, so it was fine.
Well, that was the thing. We're going to find a less politically incorrect way to talk about it in the third segment. But no, the second segment is something that Jen has asked to talk about. It's an issue that I noticed, that I know other people noticed it because I had a lot of people messaging me. I'm going to describe what it is, and then I'm going to yield the floor to Jen. Was it Tuesday or Wednesday? Like, it was not long.
I think it was Wednesday, actually.
Okay, so it was about a day and a half after the election, a full day after we knew what the results are. Danielle Smith said that Alberta will be amending the legislation or passing new legislation. You can correct me on the technicalities here, but the net effect of it is it's going to make it easier for voters to propose referendum that then the government will be obligated to meet. And this is something, Jen, in recent podcasts and a recent column you wrote, you'd been talking about how the ceiling for citizens to trigger a referendum on any issue in Alberta is actually it's high. It was not insurmountably high, but it was a reasonably high bar.
I believe I actually have to make a correction here because I misread something in my previous column. In my previous column, I said something to the effect of the electorate would, any kind of, in order to trigger a referendum under the Citizens Initiative Act, you'd need, I think it was 10% of the number of votes cast in the last election. So like 10% of the electorate, according to the number of votes cast in the last election, which the math that I did, which might be wrong now, was I think like 300,000 votes. Like it's a pretty substantial number to meet. What I screwed up, and I will freely own I screwed up, that there was a difference between a general referendum and a referendum that had to do with constitutional matters. The constitutional matters threshold was actually twice that. So this week we have Danielle Smith, who passed a Bill C-54, and essentially this bill...
I want to pedantically interrupt here. Passed or proposed?
Sorry, you're right. Correct. Thank you for correcting me. Proposed.
Okay.
Bill C-54. Nothing's passed yet. That essentially lowers the bar for constitutional referendums to where the bar currently sits for non-constitutional referendums. So I think that the number, now again, I'd have to go and check how many electors voted in the last election and do the math on this. Nobody's coming to me for math, okay? But I think that puts the bar at what I said it was in the column, about 300,000. But please don't quote me on that. Please let me double check that before I put it in writing. But I think that's where it is. So the actual total number that I proposed in that column wasn't wrong, but it was wrong at the time. So I deserve to be corrected for that. But essentially, yes, this particular legislation makes it materially easier for separatists to meet the bar to force a separation referendum. And the other thing that it does is there's also some changes that it makes to donations. So it totally opens up the door to giving donations to third-party advertisers, corporations, and unions for all kinds of elections, including referenda. There are some limiting factors on donations in terms of spending that are going to be put in place, but I think it's more than made up for by the other thing. Now, obviously, this legislation was not cooked up in the last 24 hours. It has been many months in the making. However, you can't on one hand say, I'm just going to let the separatists spew their beef and, whine into the wind and expect that it will come to nothing, and then also make it materially easier for those people to succeed in their goals. Right now, I think what's pissing me off about what's happening in Alberta is that Danielle Smith is talking out of both sides of her goddamn mouth. She's on one hand saying, oh, well, I support the idea of a sovereign Alberta and a united Canada. But if the citizens force my hand, there's nothing I can do to stop a referendum. Oh, but at the same time, I'm going to pass legislation that will make it easier for them to force me to pass a referendum. Like she's playing it in such a way that she can't lose. So she goes back to the crazies in the base and can say, "Well, I made it easier for you guys to get a referendum on the table. If you can't meet the bar, that's not my problem." But then she can go back and say to the rest of Canada and to like the 80% of the population that has no interest in playing along with this game and say, well, nothing I can do. They're forcing my hand. Like, I couldn't possibly be expected to respond to a question that hasn't even been proposed yet. Like, this is just classic both sides of your mouthism. This is what's happening. And it pisses me off as an Albertan because I think it's bullshit. If she wants to run a referendum, stop with the bullshit, run a referendum. Like, stop with the citizens' initiative nonsense. If she's serious about running a referendum, or if she's serious about a national unity crisis, put your fucking cards down. You don't need a citizens' initiative or referendum to force this to happen. You can just say you're going to do it and put a referendum on the table and let Albertans decide. But she doesn't want to do that. Do you want to know why she doesn't want to do that, Matt? Because that referendum would fail. We've done our own math on this. We've done our own polling on this. The percentage of people who would even consider this in a hypothetical way is like 20, maybe 25% post an election, which is a problem, which is something that I think Mark Carney and the Liberals and the rest of the Canada need to take seriously and deal with, and at the very minimum not exacerbate. I'll get into that in a minute. Like, it's a problem. But this is still very much a fringe proposition being parroted by the absolute usual suspects who have been off and on referendum for now a generation. She's not passing this legislation because there is a genuine groundswell of normie support for a referendum. This is absolutely a manufactured national unity crisis that she's doing either because she thinks that Danielle Smith is proposing, either because she thinks that it can give her more leverage to deal with Mark Carney, or because she actually does want a referendum, or because she actually is interested in joining the 51st state or engaging in a secessionist threat. I don't know what the answer to that question is because she won't give a straight answer about it. But look, I would just remind a lot of people in Canada who are responding to a lot of this stuff, and I would say 80% of the province is not interested in this. And I think that if you actually propose independence or 51 in a rational way that doesn't simply appeal to people's anger, but takes the pros and the cons into serious effect and consideration, I think support will collapse from there. So right now, I've always believed, and I still believe that, whether you want to call it Wexit, separation, succession, 51, all of this is a reflection of an emotion, not a reasoned response to a problem. Right? It's a reaction to the fact that Albertans have. I mean, I don't want to go into the whole spiel because I've done this a million times before. But reactions. It's a reaction to the fact that Albertans have felt, left out of the cultural and governance apparatus that makes decisions and normalizes political discourse in this country. They feel like Albertans have disproportionately contributed to Confederation's wealth, which they have. They get disproportionately less out of it, which they do, and then they get shit on it by the rest of Canada for their troubles. We saw that through the last 15 years of the pipeline politics and squabbles over oil and gas and blah, 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 blah. Are there things that I think that the Liberals should be doing and responding to in response to this? Yes. I think the Liberals should be doing some things. I think the Liberals should be building some bridges here. I think the rest of the Canada does need to not be dicks about it, okay? But do I think that there's actually a national unity threat that is an organic response of a plurality of the people of Alberta? No. Like, the people who are talking about this sort of stuff are keyboard warriors. They're people who are perpetually aggrieved, largely on the right wing. They're minority players. They're minority figures in the government. I mean, this is the thing that I think pisses me off about this Bill C-55. Like, nobody in my, playground circle is talking about how we should separate from Canada. That is not a normal topic of conversation that's happening among normal Albertans. I'm sorry, it isn't. Maybe it will be. But right now, no. So who is this bill for? Who is this bill for? Because
I was going to ask you that.
This bill's not for me.
So let me ask you the question then, and this is a genuine question from me to you. Mm-hmm. Let me more of a comment than a question, but let me preface this. When I saw this, I thought to myself, "Oh, okay, yeah, Sure. Yeah.
Right.
Here we go. Like that didn't take long. And I can guarantee you in some of my savvier text message threads and group chats, that was the almost unanimous response to this, which is, gee, Danielle, didn't wait long, did ya?
Yeah, it wasn't subtle,
But
was it?
but let me ask you a question. And I'm just asking this. I'm a good faith
Okay.
questioner here.
Sure.
Is there any reason to do this other than what you and I have already said, which is basically to help the separatists? Has there been any suggestion the threshold's too high? Are there any other issues?
No one was demanding this. No one was demanding this. Now, there are other things in this bill that you can make an argument, or I think that a lot of different sort of minor things have been put into this bill as well, like no electronic vote tabulators, or we're going to vote our, like that stuff's fine, and I think this were longstanding, whatever. I have no issue with, again, I have no issue with like 60-75% of what's in this bill. Most of it's pretty benign tweaks to the Elections Act, right? Like, it's fine. But I also think that a lot of the more benign stuff's been put in there in order to give cover for the stuff that isn't benign.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, I mean, that's what I assumed, look, but I wanted to ask you, yeah.
There was no groundswell of normie support for lowering the threshold for a constitutional referendum on the Citizens Initiative. There was not, that was not a thing that existed. Period. The only reason to do that is because she's got like a couple thousand people in rural Alberta who are in the UCP base who really want to separate and think that the threshold is too high. And so she's going to throw them a bone. There's no other rationale for doing that. It's a sop to a fringe of Alberta who thinks that the answers lie in separation. And I don't know, at what point does something cease to become a fringe? If the separatists want to claim that they have 20-25% support, I think that support is misleadingly high, because I think that's 20-25% in a very hypothetical, perfect scenario.
And some of it's soft.
And so I think 20-25% is a soft support number. Even if you want to claim that it's that high, that's still a minority, and it's a strong minority. Like, it's a weak minority, right? Now, I don't want to necessarily let Central Canada off the hook here. I think that
we're awful.
No, you're awful. You're awful people. I'm going to say that right off the bat. Mm-hmm. And I think that level of support for succession is still too high. Mm-hmm. If you are running a country and one of your regions has a high, like even soft support of 20-25%, that should concern you. That is a problem. That is a glaring sort of yellow flag being flagged in front, like waved in front of your head. There is an issue here that you need to address. And if the Liberals come back with really punitive laws around oil and gas, or if they come back just trying to retaliate against Trump's tariffs by shutting down the oil and gas sector, if they respond with there's all kinds of things that they could do that would turn a manufactured unity crisis into a real one. And so they can't scoff at it. Like, you can't ignore the risk here. And I think that there are some smart things that Carney could do and should do right now. One of them should be drop the emissions cap. Just drop it. Like, let it go. My personal opinion is that I think the Liberal government should ignore Alberta's existence for a couple of years. Don't talk about oil and gas. Don't govern around oil and gas. But unless you want to talk about building a pipeline or showing up for Stampede, Alberta does not exist to you. Don't talk about it. Don't mention it. Don't respond to it. All right? Just ignore us. Just ignore us for like 4 or 5 years. All right? That's honestly, I think, the answer here. But beyond that, like, it's not something that I think that Central Canada should be blasé about. But I also would like Central Canada to remember that what's happening here is a domestic sop for a very specific domestic base. It's not representative, clearly not representative of where the majority of Albertans are at. And that's what I think pisses me off so much about it. I wouldn't have so much of a problem with this Citizens Initiative change if it really were a genuine reaction to a groundswell of demand among normal people in Alberta. But instead, it's not. It is throwing a bone to a very vocal minority in the province that is disorganized in its pursuit of a destructive end. And that is irresponsible for a leader to be doing. And it only compounds the responsibility by the fact that she's not just taking ownership and responsibility for it. She's trying to play both sides of the game here, and that pisses me off.
You know what it reminds me of? We're just asking questions.
Yeah, we're just asking questions.
Yeah, we're just lowering the threshold to trigger a referendum.
Yeah. And if there's citizen support, the threshold's still high. And if there's citizen support, do you support a separation referendum? Well, I couldn't possibly comment about a question that hasn't been proposed.
We're just making it more possible to have the referendum.
Look, if you're a pro separation, if you're pro successionist, and there are people in my sphere who I know and who I quite like, who are pro successionist. Come on, this has got to piss you off. You know she's playing you. Like, why? I'm sorry. If she's on your side, then let her be on your side. Why is she so chicken shit? Why won't she just come right out and support it?
Okay, I have a different question for you. It's related to that. One of the things I find weird, and as I always make this joke, I know it when our Alberta listeners get me from Toronto explaining Alberta to you here. I want to make a comment, make it with love, and I make it with neutrality because I don't live there. I don't think Smith is being particularly subtle here. And this is kind of why I asked you the question. Was there any other plausible explanation for this?
This isn't subtle. Come on now.
The word that you used, chicken shit, is basically what it looked like to me too. It's like, I'm not going to take a stand on the issue. I'm just going to accidentally leave the gates to the city walls open.
Yeah.
And oops. But what I find fascinating, and you and I have talked about this a bit in the context of the United States, why isn't she just being wrecked for this? Because it is unsubtle and it is chicken shit. Why are the sovereigntists, but also like Naheed Nenshi, leader of the NDP?
Where is Naheed Nenshi?
Why aren't they feasting on this?
Where is Naheed Nenshi?
And I remember, I don't remember if it was a tweet or a comment he made in an interview, but I remember he had this comment, a quip or a boast or whatever. I don't even know the words here. I'm sorry, I haven't napped enough this week. You're going to need to give me to next week. Mm-hmm. But he basically said if she believes in it so much, she should run on it and resign if she loses. Yeah. That, I think, is exactly the right response. Mm-hmm. And I'm not even saying this is a proud Canadian Federalist. I'm just saying if either political party in Alberta were to hire me to give strategic advice right now, the strategic advice I would be giving to Danielle Smith is stop with the chicken shit stuff. Take a side, declare yourself, and fight. And the strategic advice I would be giving to the NDP is as long as she's doing the chicken shit, we're just asking questions routine, kill her on it. Every day. Politically speaking, of course, because I don't want to use violent language.
Naheed Nenshi's, where the fuck is he?
Every day between today and when she takes a side, Nenshi should be campaigning against her.
He should be on every national and provincial talk show arguing. I'm sorry, but I live here. This is my home. I have a home here. I have no interest in being, a citizen of Alberta, the Hermit Kingdom. None. Thank you for coming out. I have no. And do you know the feeling that this stuff gives me? Can I just be real straight with you? Claustrophobia.
Oh, I know exactly what you mean. I've used similar terms recently. In the geopolitical sense, I feel like walls are closing in on Canada.
Walls are closed, but that's what it feels like even more narrowly in Alberta. It gives me the separatism gives me the extraordinary feeling of claustrophobia. Because these guys are basically saying, we can't win in Canada, so we're going to make our world smaller so we can control it more. It's like these people all want to be king shits of Turd Island is what they want. That's what they're aiming for. And I've lived in Alberta quite happily for, 15 years now. I've made my home here. I raised my kids here. But if you want to turn Alberta, let's talk about this 51 stuff secondly, but if you want to turn Alberta into a sovereign state, You're going to cut me off from my family. You're going to cut me off from work and, more importantly, mobility rights from the rest of the country. And I'm going to be trapped in a province of like 4 million people. I don't think so.
Sustained by a declining asset.
Sustained by a declining asset.
Yeah.
And you think you're going to have a better hope trying to like get a pipeline built when we're an independent sovereign nation? Okay, but what if we become 51? Okay, sure. I'm still cut off from my now I'm a member of a different citizenry of my family and the different citizenry than the one that I was born in. I'm sure the Americans will be absolutely welcoming their traitors in with open arms, by the way. I'm sure they'll love that. And maybe in a scenario where Alberta really does become a 51st state with full work and mobility rights, sure, that problem's ameliorated. But are you really going to trust Donald Trump to provide you a good deal? Donald Trump.
Ask the Ukrainians how that worked out.
Yeah, ask the Ukrainians how that worked out. No, you're going to wind up being basically trapped in your mobility rights, trapped in your work rights, probably non-voting members of Puerto Rico del Norte. And if you think you have problems trying to get through to Ottawa, good luck in Washington. You're a province of 40 million now in a country of 400. Texas and California struggle to get through to Washington. You ain't nothing. You're Oklahoma. All right? I just think the problem, and again, I just get this feeling of like the walls closing in, claustrophobia on both sides. And the idea that the leader of the province would be humoring this, would not be able to recognize the risks she was entailing with this shit, and wouldn't even have the courage to come out and say what she believes forthrightly. I think that's unexcusable. I think it's just totally morally inexcusable. And I think that it's just ridiculous that Nensi's been unable to break through. I mean, by the way, I specifically asked Nensi if he wanted to come on the line to talk to me about separatist stuff. Too busy. Fine, great, cool, whatever. Nobody's obliged to talk to me. But my dude, Nensi, there is no path to power unless you're willing to talk with people like me. You cannot. I'm sorry, I'm speaking directly to you, dude. You cannot win in Alberta by only talking to NDP supporters on your Facebook page.
Okay, yeah, you're right. But I just think the bigger issue is still, I'm almost at a point, I was saying this to a friend of mine, an American, a few days ago. I'm not mad at Trump, and I'm not mad at Trump voters. I am astonished at how ineffective resistance has been. Mm-hmm. And I know it's such a wearying term, the resistance. Well, yeah, I get it. I roll my eyes at it too. But what I'm looking at here, and again, this is just a neutral political analysis from Toronto, the position that Smith is taking is obviously bullshit. It is transparently bullshit. It's just asking questions, refusing to take a position on it, lowering the threshold to the benefit of only one group.
Yeah.
And okay, you know what? If she has decided in her wisdom that is the right direction to be going, okay. But I'm just saying, that is opening up a massive vulnerable flank that could be exploited by an opposition party that
wasn't
knew what
useless?
it was doing.
Yeah.
And it's funny because in the first segment we were talking about kind of, wither the NDP, right? And we're talking about the federal level. And you made the point, and you're right, that the NDP does quite well at the provincial level. From the Pacific Ocean kind of to Ontario, or including Ontario. Yeah. Ontario is a mixed bag, but basically from everywhere from the Pacific to Ontario, and sometimes including Ontario, the provincial NDP does great. The Alberta NDP, within recent memory, has won a government. It has come pretty close. It's had competitive campaigns the other time here. I think the facts on the ground would suggest that a really effective, well-run Alberta NDP could challenge for power. Now,
especially
now would be a good time.
Especially on a question of an existential threat.
So let me ask you one more question on this, then we'll move on. You would ask the question rhetorically, I assume, that where is Nensi? I want to ask the question literally, where is Nensi? Is he?
I have no idea.
Is he campaigning on other issues?
I've seen him quoted a couple times, but he is not. It's almost like he's taken his profile to the NDP and the NDP has swallowed it like a black hole. What is the purpose of putting someone as high profile and well known as an NDP as your leader if you can't transmute that into profile for your party? What are we doing here, guys? I don't get it. I don't get it.
This is like my meta frustration with everything. A friend of mine, a very, very close friend, sent me one of the funniest memes I've seen ever recently. And it was just a picture of a woman looking absolutely horrified. And it was captioned, "When your brand of neurodivergence has led you to be both unusually gifted at pattern recognition and a history buff." And I just laughed at that because it was a very Matt-esque meme, and the person it was coming from too was, let's just say, it was on brand. But I just thought it was hilarious, right? Because I'm not going to go full 1930s on you here, but things once set in motion typically will continue to go until they're stopped. And I've been looking at the United States for years, wondering when an organized pushback would begin. It hasn't. We have ICE raiding the wrong homes and accidentally vanishing people who are either U.S. citizens or under protection orders into foreign prisons. And other than like a school teacher in Maine organizing a protest that had a few thousand people show out, the reaction has been muted. Talked about this in recent podcasts. Canada has been adrift for years. I've been waiting to see when the immune system response to that would come. It hasn't. I'm looking at where I live in Ontario, right? Because I don't write a lot about Ontario-specific issues for the line. I don't know if that's of huge interest to the line's readership, but I can write. I used to write for TVO. I can write for the Toronto Star. If I want to write about like local issues, I have places to do that. Shit's breaking down here, and like Doug Ford just keeps cruising to majority after majority after majority, apparently on the basis of his cheesecake recipes, which, by the way, actually wasn't bad. Alberta, Danielle Smith, again, lover or hater, I'm not even taking a position on the issues here. What she is doing right now is politically risky.
It's economically risky. It's politically risky.
But no one's exploiting it.
And it's...
like she's exposing her flank here. And I'm kind of thinking, oh, okay, Nenshi. I've interviewed Nenshi. Smart guy.
Smart guy. Good at politics.
I know a few Alberta NDPers, smart people. There is a gigantic, and again, I'm using this in political terms because I do not want to use violent language. There is a huge open target here for them.
Well, also, bluntly, I mean, part of the reason all governments, this isn't a left-right thing, all governments fall into blind spots and traps. And this is why we have adversarial systems that are built up around governing opposition, right? It's a recognition that opposition is a crucial part of the system that we have, and that without credible and active opposition, governments fall off the rails, and all governments do and will. Opposition is in and of itself a holy duty, okay? Like it is an important thing that we have strong, credible, effective opposition parties. They do important work, scrutinizing, challenging, taking into account the weaknesses and the failures of the governing party, okay? But I don't know. Is it the governing parties are weak, or is it the opposition has lost the ability to function?
I don't know.
Is it both?
I mean, like I've said before, we need wolves, because more effective opposition parties, in theory, would either become government, or they would force the governments to become better.
Yes, and I think also part of it, and I will take some weird quasi credit here, is that the media just isn't as strong in Alberta. Like even from when I got here, there just aren't as many people.
We're part of the we're one of the wolves that has been removed from the ecosystem.
Yeah, that's right. And I think that I take my own credit here. Like, I don't cover Alberta politics full time anymore. I do national stuff as well. I do all kinds of cultural stuff as well. So I'm like, I'm not 100% focused on Alberta politics. And there just aren't enough. Like, I don't have the bandwidth or the time to be covering Danielle Smith all the time. There's a limited audience for covering Danielle Smith all the time, right? So that's part of the problem. But it's just like, man, I don't know, like, maybe this whole referendum stuff goes nowhere. I mean, already we're starting to see these weird third-party cutout organizations that can't be traced are starting to, like, buy up things like billboards and ads, and things like
web domains, and
domains, all that kind of stuff. I mean, I just looked at one today. It's like Patch Lives Matter. I mean, oh God, right? And you look at it, and it's like it's funded by Connor McWexit. We're gonna blah 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 blah, and it's I don't know if the Americans are funding this. I don't know who the hell is funding this. I don't know if the Albertan who's behind this isn't being funded by anyone else. I don't know if this is just a grift. I mean, this is also something, I mean, Jason Kenney, God bless him, is totally unfettered on Twitter now. He's great to read on Twitter. But he's made the point, is like, there are people here who are going to use the separatist sentiment, and they're going to use it to try and enrich themselves, right? They're going to try and create petitions that will wind up being data mining operations, or they're going to wind up creating, quasi-legitimate looking websites or cutout groups that are going to be the equivalent of fraudulent GoFundMes. And they're going to say, donate to us to show that Patch Lives Matter, or donate to us to blah, 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 blah. And you have no idea where those donations are going, probably to some individual's bank account. And I'm sorry, if you're handing over your retirement check to Connor McWexit, you're a mark. Somebody's taking advantage of this, right? And in a very non-transparent way. So, like, there's money to be made on this stuff.
Yeah. No matter what happens with the attempts to get a referendum, no matter what happens with the referendum, if there is, a lot of money is going to change hands during the process.
And again, I will put the blame on this back for Danielle Smith. Some of these organizations are going to be grifts. They're going to be grifts who exist to take advantage of especially angry, older, and rural Albertans, your constituencies, your citizens, okay? And they're going to exist to just take their money. And you're nodding to them. You're winking to them. You're giving these people succor with this kind of legislation.
Unusually good pattern recognition and knowledge of history. Nothing new here. All right. When we come back in a minute, we are going to make a declaration. That's something for you to look forward to. We're also going to talk a little bit about some of the aftermath of the election. Jen wanted to get that Alberta stuff off her chest. And I'm going to talk a little provincial stuff as well. We're going to do that in just a couple of moments. Stick around. As ever, check us out at readtheline.ca. Like and subscribe. We'll be right back. Jen and I spent some time this week napping and snacking, and elections are hard. Like, they're not as hard on us as they are the people actually doing them, but they're still hard.
And I didn't cover this one as closely as I normally would have, so I accept responsibility and failure on that part. But
one of the things we've decided, and we're going to make a very public announcement about this, we are declaring neutrality in any future conservative civil war. There might be a campaign to undermine Pierre Poilievre. Pierre Poilievre might be forced out of the position as conservative leader. I think it's very possible that neither of those things happens, in fact. Like, I'm not betting the proverbial farm on that, but I think it might happen. And even if those things don't happen, there will be people inside the Conservative Party who are unhappy with this, or even inside the broader conservative movement who are pissed off at Pierre Poilievre. We're putting this just down on the record here. The line will welcome with equal favor anyone who wants to make the case for Pierre Poilievre remaining as leader, or anyone who wants to make the case against him. I don't know how other media organizations, particularly independent media organizations, are going to handle this. We've just decided to put it right on our sleeves. We are interested in content about the future direction of the Conservative Party and the future leadership of the Conservative Party. Jen and I may ourselves express our opinions on this, but the line as an institution will not take a position. We're going to leave this up to the Conservatives. So that being said, Jen, let me ask you a question, not asking for a preference, just asking for a prediction. 6 months from now, is Pierre Poilievre the Conservative leader?
I think so. Yeah, I think
I think so too.
Yeah.
I think so too. I don't have any sense that there's an appetite to do the dirty work of purging him.
No, but there is a hell of a lot of internecine anger, and some of that has even started to spill over in public in ways that are unseemly. Let's just put it that way. Unseemly.
We are going to, I'm not going to speak the royal we here. I'm going to phrase this next bit very carefully because one of the people I'm about to refer to is a wee bit on the litigious side. But if
in the conservative movement, impossible. We are
I know.
The conservative movement is the party of free speech, Matt.
Yeah, someone fetch Jen her smelling salts. I just knocked her out like a feather. If you know where to look, you can see where some people have what I'm going to call free and frank exchanges of views. And some of those free and frank exchanges of views are happening in very public forums right now. People that I know personally are acting like psychopaths right now. And I think part of this is what we were saying a minute ago, exhaustion.
Mm-hmm.
Some of it's
disappointment.
Fury. Some of those rage. And here I will name names, and I'm not even being judgmental here. Jamil Javani, recently reelected in a 905 riding, old radio colleague of mine. The way he teed off on Doug Ford on election night, and in fairness to Jamil, I'm not saying he picked the fight. The way that some of Ford's proxies were tearing down Pierre Poilievre and campaign manager Jenny Byrne during the campaign. I have seen some liberals say, again in public forums, that Prime Minister Carney is going to have a freer than expected hand because the Conservatives will be consumed by a civil war.
Which is exactly what the country needs right now. Not an effective organized opposition, but a bunch of conservatives who are at each other's throats.
I do think the one thing that could unify the conservative movements briefly is a chance to put a kill shot into a liberal minority. But I do think, if nothing else, Mark Carney has some runway here. And you and I have spoken about this before. There's probably going to be a pause in our politics, as long as outside external events permit it. And it's a pretty big if. I don't know. It's been a weird few years. But I think every party has a mutual self-interest right now in getting through the month of May, sorting out interim leadership where it's needed, figuring out if Pierre Poilievre needs to run in a by-election somewhere, or whether or not he gets to stay in Stornoway.
That was just announced. He is going to run in an election. That was announced while we were on the air, so apologies for
Where's
that.
he running?
I'm going to pull that up right now. MP Damien Couric, trigger a by-election in Battle River Crowfoot. Safest Conservative seat in Alberta. He was reelected with 81.8% of the vote. Taking no chances on that one. I was kind of hoping that he was going to run in Midnapore. That would have been great.
I don't like that. That's weak. That's loser energy.
My argument would have been for Midnapore because I think he's actually got family in this riding. Also, it's my riding, so he would have come door knocking to my door, and I just would have delighted in that personally. It would have been incredible.
Okay, I've already promised neutrality, so I'm going to limit my comments to loser energy. But losing your own riding and then retreating to the safest riding in the country is not a signal of confidence in your own future. Is that a fair comment to make?
I think that's a fair comment. I think it's fair.
So that was one of the issues that needs to get settled in May. That is now settled. Carney's going to put together a cabinet or keep the cabinet he has. People have been asking me about this. The Carney government remains. He doesn't need to form a new government and a new cabinet. This is his government. Like the government survives the election
Yeah.
period, so there is continuity. He can make changes if he wishes. Then there's going to come June. We're going to need some kind of measure to fund the government. There'll have to be some kind of throne speech. We've already talked about that. The king himself will be delivering it. That's cool. There will be some votes in June. I would imagine the House will recess fairly early, and everybody's going to limp into the summer. But by the time September comes, the Conservatives are going to need to have their shit together.
Yep.
They're going to need.
You guys have like 6 more weeks of getting your feels out and get over it.
I think, and this is something you and I were talking about earlier, there's some disagreement between the two of us here. Not intense, but I think the case. Well, let me just put it this way: did Polyev blow a lead? That was the question we were disagreeing on earlier.
So
you say yes, I say no, but I'll let you make the case. Did Polyev blow a lead?
yeah, he blew a lead. Of course, he blew a lead. He was 25 points ahead. Now, that number hides the thinness of the blown lead, if that makes sense. Like, the party didn't collapse. The party made significant electoral gains. No one would dispute that. But this was a winnable election they didn't win. And I don't buy into the argument that they didn't win just because the NDP collapsed. That's nonsense. They can win in a two-party system. They didn't. They didn't come across like the adults in the room. They didn't pivot on the Trump stuff fast enough or hard enough. The solutions they proposed were relatively small, and they alienated every single potential ally, enemy, coalition partner, both within and without the Conservative Party. Like they screwed up, man. And like, look, if they could have won a majority government with 5% more of the vote, and I think they probably could have, depending on how that 5% were distributed, then that means that you blew it. You couldn't close the deal. Coffee's for closers, assholes. And you didn't close. You didn't get the last 5%. Doesn't matter if you increased your overall vote share. It doesn't matter if you got more actual votes. You don't get coffee. Now, that doesn't mean I think that they should spill Pierre. And in fact, I think in our dispatch right after the election, I made the argument that the Conservatives need to get out of the habit of dumping their leader after every election. It's a bad look. And it creates this magpie effect where, like, no, you're stuck with him for at least another election. I actually think that you are. But I do think that there were major things that this party could have done to improve. They did not run a perfect campaign. They made many, many strategic mistakes. I think that they need to change staff. And I think that they need to readdress their electoral assumptions. And they also think they need to start reminding themselves that politics isn't about winning arguments, it's about building coalitions. And if you blow your coalition, yeah, sure, maybe you'll get 41%, but you need 45. Moving on.
Not that I disagree. I understand the argument you're making, but I think, and I have been looking at it. I told you in the first segment, I asked you the question, what did you wake up to and be surprised by? One of the things I have been looking at this week with confusion is that this is an election that defies an easy summary narrative. The easiest summary narratives are for the Liberals and the Conservatives. The Liberal summary narrative for the 2025 election is that a leader who was not in politics came in, replaced an unpopular prime minister after 10 years, revived the country's fortunes, and won a minority. Pretty easy. The NDP narrative is that the same strategy, I guess we'd call it that, of propping up the Liberals in recent years and postponing an election resulted in the destruction of his party to a point where it's not clear that it will come back. And if it comes back, it may not come back easily. It's really hard to give a one-sentence summary of what the hell just happened to the Conservatives. Because everything Jen just said is true. I agree with her entirely on staffing changes. I agree with her entirely on focusing on coalitions. The fact that Pierre Poilievre had never called Doug Ford is insane. Like, it's not just inexplicable, it's political malpractice Careers should be ended on the basis of that alone. How you let that happen is insane. The fact that the party spent a week insisting that reports that Poilievre would lose Carleton were fake news or dirty trick and then lost Carleton is unforgivable. The career should be ended by that too. But I'm also looking at the fact that the Conservatives opened up a massive polling advantage in recent years and basically held their numbers. What happened was that the Liberals vaulted over them by assembling a coalition that is bizarre and probably not sustainable. Are left-wing and Quebec voters going to remain in the Liberal camp indefinitely? If even half of those people go home, it's a Conservative majority on Monday. And coulda, woulda, shoulda, wishes were horses, blah, blah, blah. I get it. But I've been looking at these Ontario numbers. Pierre Poilievre did it. He did what Erin O'Toole tried to do. He did what Andrew Scheer tried to do. He broke through in Ontario. He just did it in an election where it didn't end up mattering. And I don't know what the hell to make of that. I honestly don't know what to make of that.
Matt, do you want to know what to make of that?
Sure.
I'm going to repeat one of the best monologues that was ever put to film cinema.
You're going to read
Ready?
me the Glengarry Glen Ross thing, are you?
The leads are weak. You're weak. You can't close the leads you're given, then you can't close shit. You are the shit. Hit the bricks, pal, and beat it, because you're going out.
Always
and I would not interpret that quote. That I would not interpret.
And we didn't plan that, by the way. I just knew Jen was going to Glengarry Glen Ross. Can I mention one other?
Second prize is a set of steak knives. Third prize is you're fired.
Fired.
We'll send Poilievre a set of steak knives. How about that?
We could. Should we?
We probably should. That would be really funny. And we'll put on the front, you tried.
Oh, let's just send him the steak knives.
Let's totally send him steak knives.
Because we fucked up.
We're sending him line-branded steak knives.
We should have... We were too late when we realized years ago we should have sent Chrystia Freeland a Disney Plus subscription. We're not going to miss this opportunity. We will send Pierre Poilievre a set of steak knives.
A set of steak knives. There you go.
Okay, well, we're going to get Melissa on that. I also have one personal note, Jen, I need to make. I screwed up on the Monday live stream, and I just need to correct something.
Okay.
My 12-year-old daughter was helping me put together the logistics of the live stream. One of the things she helped me do was pick the random selection, the random order of the beers I was going to drink. She also told me to eat this gummy bear thing and to tell everybody what I think about it, and I forgot. And she was actually quite pissed off.
It's an edible?
It's not. It is
because your daughter's way too young to be feeding you edibles.
If it's an edible, I will be surprised. It is not that kind of gummy. It is apparently some kind of new fruit snack. And she wanted me to try it and tell everybody what I think about it. So
okay.
It's actually pretty good.
All right,
it's got like a more... got like a firm, gelatinous exterior, but it's like soft and liquidy in the middle. This is like tangerine flavored or maybe mango or something. Okay, so babe, I apologize. I'm sorry I did not eat your gummy on the live stream. I told you I'd make it up for you. I have eaten the gummy. It's actually not bad. I would eat these again. I don't know where you got this, but it's pretty good.
Well, let's make sure that we finish up the show notes and the thumbnail before that hits. On that note... I think we have everything. That's everything we have to say this week at the line. I hope you enjoyed our post-election wrap-up, our terrible jokes, our lack of empathy, our screaming into the abyss. And if you enjoyed all this and more, please do check us out at www.readtheline.ca. Like and subscribe.